Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's right on 12 o'clock, so we'll kick off and get started. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon online, although I'm sure most of you are spending quite a lot of your days online, and we really appreciate you taking time to join another webinar. So today we're here for the Entering the Asian Health Market webinar. My name is Sarita McGrain, and I'm with the Department of State Development, Tourism and Innovation, based in Toowoomba, in the Darling Down Southwest Queensland Economic Development Team. Certainly I would like to start off today by acknowledging the traditional owners across all of the locations that we're meeting on today, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And again, as you can tell, we're online. We have cameras and microphones for participants today are turned off, but most of you would probably be familiar with these functions by now in the recent few months that we've had. So the Q&A function is available throughout the full hour. So please feel free to use that. We've got a few speakers today, followed by some Q&A time, and feel free to post the questions as you wish. There's also an option to like other participants' questions as they post them, which is a really great function to help us understand some general themes that might be raised from yourselves in the audience that we could put to our panellists. So speaking with us today, we have Deputy CEO of Life Sciences Queensland, Dr. Nagaraj Jopisetti, and also Rob Scott, who's the Managing Director of BlueSky Partners and Australia-China Technology Incubator. So the purpose of today's event is to provide an overview of some of the opportunities and challenges of entry into the China export market, and of course more broadly the Asian market, specifically for health, medtech and biomed companies across Queensland. So we know we have quite a few participants today, and we trust that you'll find some real value out of the hour that you spend with us. So much of the hour today will be presentation style to give you as much information as we can, and then we'll go through as many Q&As as possible as we can at the end. So before we hear from Rob, who's based in Shanghai and sitting in the TIQ Trade Investment Queensland offices in Shanghai today, we're going to hear from Nagaraj. So many of you would be familiar with the work of Life Sciences Queensland, who aim to grow individual business, industry segments, and certainly build capacity and profile for the Queensland life sciences sector. And Dr. Nagaraj Jopisetti is the Deputy CEO of Life Sciences Queensland and heads up the business development arm for LSQ. And Nagaraj has previously worked at the Translational Research Institute, which many of you would also be familiar with, and has worked as an innovation champion for quite a while, with a strong track record in technology commercialisation. Also holds, obviously, some great qualifications. His BPharm degree from India, a Master's in Biotechnology from Griffith University, a PhD in Pharmacy from the University of Queensland, and just to fill in some of his spare time, Nagaraj recently also completed an MBA from the University of Newcastle. So Nagaraj is going to run us through, before we hear from Rob, just an overview of the Life Sciences Catalyst Program, which is funded through the Queensland Government's Advanced Queensland Initiative. So thanks, Nagaraj.
Thank you, Sarita. There was, for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. I hope you're able to see my screen. And what I would like to do is, I'm conscious of time, but very quickly give you, for those of you who are not aware of who we are as LSQ, to give you about LSQ and a brief introduction to the Catalyst program. And I hope you're able to pass the word out of the Catalyst program. And one of the initiatives of Catalyst is this webinar, working with Rob and helping our startups and SMEs to see how we can help them connect into the global markets and make it easier for them. So, okay, there we go. I think that's correct now. I'm going for those of you who don't know Life Sciences Queensland, We engage with the full spectrum of Queensland life sciences industry, anything to do with healing, fueling, and feeding the world. In a broad sense, we are a peak industry body for the sector, a member-based organization working to enhance Queensland's national and international reputation as a center for commercial and research excellence in life sciences. And broadly, you can see the areas of interest that we cover and represent. Our vision is broadly, again, to double the size of our life sciences sector, both in number of jobs and dollar value by 2030. And our objective is create opportunities for industry stakeholders to come together, develop the industry by supporting local industry forums like this and providing members with tools to accelerate their business growth. We look forward to creating new business opportunities for members through market outreach and play a leading role in influencing policy so as to help and shape the strategic direction and sustainable growth of Queensland's life science industry. So we work collaboratively with a number of industry stakeholders and government departments for the benefit of the industry. So coming to today, why we are here, I just wanted to talk to you about one of our initiatives, Life Sciences Catalyst Program, which is basically a new initiative from Life Sciences Queensland and is championing the aspirations of Queensland's knowledge-based life sciences industry. Catalyst is a platform to facilitate, accelerate, and develop innovation. And as you can see, we have a very collaborative body looking to harness the depth and breadth of our established networks through our membership to cultivate the next generation of ideas by connecting startups and SMEs with our memberships and other industry stakeholders. We do this through mentoring, training, providing networks, access to capital sources, whilst we do not fund projects, but we help making connections to networks where people can access capital resources for fast-tracking their programs, and most importantly, global markets. And that's where this initiative with Rob into Asian markets is going to be important. And then Rob will also be looking at explaining a bit more of our new initiative, which we were successful in getting the SME Export Hub, which will be based over here in Queensland in partnership with QUT. And he'll be touching upon that a bit more in detail when he speaks. Through Catalyst program, to date, we have been working with over 30 plus startups in Queensland across all those areas of support by providing a personalized roadmap for every ideas that the startups have come up and making sure they're being supported both in Brisbane, the Southeast Corridor, and regional Queensland. So these are some of our participating companies and our partners and supporters with whom we work very closely. And this is my small team at LSQ that we work both for LSQ activities and Catalyst activities, and our contact details are there in the slide below, and we'll be happy to circulate this to the wider participants. And if there's any additional information you'd like to hear about the Catalyst program, please do reach out to us. So thank you from me, and I'll hand over to Sarita so that we can go ahead to listen to Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Nagaraj. It's always valuable to understand the programs that are available, particularly within specific industries. So we're going to hear from Rob now, who, as I said earlier, is based in Shanghai and is the Managing Director of BlueSky Partners and also Australia-China Technology Incubator. And they have offices in Asia and Australia, and they aim to help Australian life sciences and medtech companies engage better with Asia. Rod is based in Shanghai and was formerly the State Leader of Queensland for the China Business Group, Ernst & Young, and Executive Director of the Queensland Chapter of the Australian-China Business Council. He's also been the co-organiser of the successful Australia-China Biotech Invest and Partnering Conference, held annually in Shanghai. And Rob has over 11 years of experience in China and Asia markets. And today, as we've said, is going to talk through the opportunities he sees emerging from China and other Asian markets, post-COVID-19, and also tips for succeeding in these, at times, complex markets. So, Rob, if you wanted to kick off, thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarita. And I'll just start the slideshow here. Hopefully everyone can see this. The technology is always interesting, especially when you're doing things from different countries. As Sarita mentioned at the beginning, I'm actually broadcasting here from the Trade and Investment Queensland office in Shanghai. So a big thanks to the staff here, of course to Sarita from the Toomba office, who've been key organising in terms of this event, and to Najaraj and his team at Life Science Queensland for helping all this happen. So today I'm going to talk, or attempt to talk, about a few different markets in the next 25-30 minutes, which will include China, Hong Kong, and also Singapore and ASEAN. And as Najaraj mentioned, we have a very exciting new program with Life Science Queensland and QUT, which is focused around the Hong Kong and ASEAN sort of sector, and I'll get to that a bit later. Without any further ado, why Asia, I guess? Well, I've been here in China, as we mentioned, for 11 years now. It doesn't seem that long, but it's been a long time. And engaging in the market for, I guess, best part of 20 years in China and more broadly in Asia. It's probably the most, I think, the most exciting part of the world to be in. And certainly the last 10 years have been, full of challenges, but also full of opportunities and successes for ourselves, and also the companies that we work with, the startups and the early stage companies we work with, and the more developed ones we've done helped as China BlueSky partners. But obviously it's a market that many Australian companies are not as familiar with. We don't see a great participation in Asia, as we would do in US or in Europe for life sciences. And there are a number of reasons why that is, and we won't get into that so much today, but we can cover off a little bit in the Q&A. And I guess the key part of that is really looking at which market to go into. You've got massive economy here in China, you've also got a very large economy in ASEAN. So we're going to try to cover some of the opportunities and challenges, I guess, for both of those, if we can, very, very briefly, today's session. And then how, as Australia-China Technology Incubator, we have helped organisations the last few years, and also going forward, as I mentioned, of QUT and LSQ going forward the next 2 or 3 years as well in the new program. So why Asia? Well, basically, there's a graphic there which actually, I guess, works pretty well in terms of looking at some of the key sort of challenges, I guess, the market, not just in China, but throughout the ASEAN region, particularly face. So we're looking there, not just economic, ecological, environmental related issues, such as pollution, but lifestyle issues. So there's been a change of diet, there's been an increase in activities like smoking, which are very hazardous to health. And as a result, compared to, say, OECD, you've got a lot of, still a lower life expectancy, you've got higher, obviously, degrees of diabetes, metabolic diseases, a whole range of lifestyle, chronic and comorbid diseases and influences, which obviously, creates many problems health-wise in Asia, but also, of course, as a life science company, creates a lot of opportunities, I guess, to help people in this region tackle and overcome, or at least improve their health and their life situation through some of the technologies that we see in Queensland, which are part of Life Science Queensland's membership program, and more broadly, they bring those into the market, and that's what we do, what we try to help with. So there's a few sort of key sort of market trends, I guess, which are happening, and I won't go into all of those, but I think I've just picked out 3 here, which we would like to sort of touch on. And that's looking at the healthcare system, which is, in many countries heavily overburdened. The aging, and sometimes called rapidly aging population in China and ASEAN, and also then the increasing ability or demand for good healthcare outcomes, which is arising through the middle class, which has been expanding massively at last 20 or 30 years here in Asia. So looking at the aging population, we've seen, for example, in China, is around about 25% of the population is currently over 65. So 25%. In the city I'm in now, in Shanghai, that's expected to get to close to 50% by 2050. And I think about 25% will be over 85. So really a huge proportion of population. And that's not in Shanghai's a little bit, skewed. It's a lot of Chinese middle class will come here and sort of retire into larger cities. But that gives you some indication in terms of the requirements for aged care. And obviously in terms of the market, in many age-related issues and health diseases, so such as Alzheimer's, there are around 10 million, for example, in China. Sufferers of Alzheimer's, that's expected to go to about 20 million in the next 20 years or so. And throughout Asia, there's a huge shortage of good aged care aged care services, which we take a little bit, I guess, for granted in a smaller economy like Australia. And I know Queensland has a higher than average sort of age population, but here in China and many ASEAN countries, you find that there's a huge shortage of beds. I think China alone is around 10 million bed shortage, so there's simply not enough beds to put the elderly members of the family once they require a certain amount of care, and that's very similar to most Asian countries, or at least ASEAN countries. And as a result, there's many opportunities that come out of that for both in-home living and also assisted care in a institutional setting. And of course, you've got with that, you've got the ability for those families, for middle class, Chinese middle class, ASEAN member countries, to afford not just better aged care for their parents, but also better health care. So you've got an example here, 150 million in ASEAN for middle class. We're going to grow to about 400 million, basically it has grown, sorry, to 400 million approximately this year already. It's supposed to grow to about 600 million over the next 20 years. So a huge market. And these and middle class, by the way, is defined as a population has around 20,000 US or more in discretionary spend. So in other words, they have enough for their accommodation, food and basic living, to actually sort of get beyond the working class sort of situation and actually start looking at outcomes brought in from Australia in terms of drugs, devices and opportunities there. And then thirdly is the actual overburdened healthcare system. And areas like telehealth, and I know there's a question on that got posed prior to the session. Telehealth in terms of helping hospitals manage their patients to help, and it's been something which has come through a lot, obviously during COVID, help one-on-one diagnosis and treatment of patients as well in remote, as well as urban areas throughout Asia. So China basically, I guess, is half this equation in a sense. China and Hong Kong. The China market, the healthcare system is around $1 trillion US at the moment. So it's the second largest healthcare system in the world. So just China alone, mainland China, is larger than Europe. Only outside of US is a larger healthcare system. And it's grown to that size. It's been a rapid growth due to the Chinese economy over the last 30 years or 40 years. And that's been growing at about 15 to 20% year on year. And that's across drugs, devices, e-health, diagnostics, all the healthcare areas. And again, this has been designed specifically by Chinese government to treat the large number of not just diseases such as cancer, and there's around 3 million people in China catching or being diagnosed or dying of cancer every year, but also these new lifestyle diseases. So you've got 400 million or so people, a small number, suffering from hypertension. You've got around 100 million. So again, I think China is third largest population outside the US, and I think maybe India in terms of diabetes, and another is pre-diabetic, including many juvenile diabetic sufferers. It's a very, there's obesity is a big issue here, and again, I've mentioned about the aging population, and that's again going to grow to 500 million by 2050. So the healthcare spend has tried to keep pace with that. It's been 6 times budget over the last 10 years, but still there are many opportunities within China, in terms of health outcomes for early stage companies which can actually come here and actually work with local organizations, local pharma, local medtech manufacturers to develop technologies which are best fit for the market here. And to give you some example, the medical device market is around 60 billion. There's around 14,000 medical device manufacturers and around 40,000 medical device distributors in China. So we work with a number of those, both ACTI and also China BlueSky partners. And there's been a number of I guess, changes to the system in terms of both regulatory and also management from supply chain that I won't get into in detail, obviously, today for time reasons, but suffice to say that the opportunities in China are getting, I guess, more clear, more transparent, and larger in terms of, or more realisable anyway, in terms of from an Australian Queensland technology perspective. And of course, Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong is an area that we're focusing on even more than we had previously as ACTI. We're actually getting, we have a great opportunity with and great support from the Hong Kong Science Technology Park. And I think 1 or 2 of their members are dialing in on this call today. So thank you again to them for doing that. And we're looking at running a fantastic program in Hong Kong with HKSTP, hopefully in the first quarter next year, which will bring, similar to the ones we've run in China previously with ACTI, bring organisations from Queensland into the Hong Kong market and actually for up to a week to actually provide more actually intensive training, intensive sort of connections, and we'll go into that hopefully a little bit at the end. But Hong Kong itself, around $2.3 billion pharma market, around 620 million medtech market, very high R&D, great centre for investment. There's not many Australian companies have actually, listed companies have had already received Hong Kong investment over the years, and part of the Greater Bay Area. So this is involving Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, a major development initiative for China's government. And around 80% or thereabouts of China's technology parks are actually located in, not in Hong Kong necessarily, although HKSTP is a great example of one it is, but in the Guangdong region, very close to Hong Kong, so a couple of hours a drive, or fast train, less, about half an hour to an hour from the Hong Kong area. So you've got a massive catchment area, great sort of centre of R&D, and a lot of support for groups like HKSTP. Of course, China has its challenges, and we saw again overnight that there's further issues again in the US-China relationship, which of course is confounding and I guess creating more confusion, I suppose, and more issues. In addition, obviously, to what's happening with COVID, we've got these trade tensions between US, China, and also to some extent Australia and China, of course, more recently. What I can say about that is that, and feel free to ask more questions at the end, is that China's still open for business, as is very much Hong Kong, and there are many opportunities for life science companies. I haven't seen any diminishment, other than obviously through the inability of companies to get here into the market, of any opportunities going forward. In fact, if anything, China's probably ramping up its need, as many countries are, for good health outcomes that we can provide as Queensland companies. So number two, the other part, I guess, is at the heart of the equation in Asia is ASEAN. And obviously Singapore is a market that many of you would know and maybe been to, but there are many other ASEAN countries, I'll touch on a few of those today, that are also have strong and quite large sort of healthcare sectors, and a good market potentially for Australian companies such as Vietnam, Malaysia particularly, and of course Indonesia is our largest neighbour to the north. So looking at Singapore, I guess initially, again, a very, very strong market, very strong, like Hong Kong, high level of R&D, high level of investment, very good stock exchange and SGX, and obviously a leader, or has been a leader, in the Southeast Asia market for headquarters of pharma and medtech companies, for multinational, but also for SMEs as well. So, and this has been supported by Singapore government. So there are a number of initiatives and grants that I put a few websites there for you to look at after this presentation, and I'll make these slides available and be sent out after this to take notes at this stage. But those initiatives can apply for companies setting up in Singapore, and again, that's a key market for what ACTI Life Science Queensland and QT are going to be doing as part of our SME Export Hub, our Life Science Hub project, which is going to be going for the next 2 years for both Singapore and Hong Kong primarily. However, as I said, there are many other Asian countries to consider. Indonesia, of course, being foremost, I guess, from Australians' minds, a huge market, 180 million people, and while it's still very much developing, does have a very large health care sector, quite a significant medtech and pharma companies, pharma sector, which are obviously very keen to insource and partner with great Queensland life science organisations, medtech organisations, healthcare organisations. Malaysia, similarly, and Thailand, more developed, and again have their own requirements in terms of again this aging population as I talked about at the beginning. The in terms of Thailand, it's been a launch market, or received a lot of investment from Japan. So there's a lot of good manufacturing sort of support and environment there. Malaysia similarly has focused a lot on high tech. A lot of e-health is a huge industry in Malaysia, as well as manufacturing. Vietnam, of course, it has its own ties, as does Philippines, to the US. And so again, strong investment there and a strong linkage to the US market for those companies who are interested. So just to give you some idea, then it's really ASEAN, really as a market, it's the third largest market. Will be third largest market according to JP Morgan by 2030. So it'll actually take over after US and China. It'll become bigger than Europe. So that's a key takeaway, I guess, from today. Just to give you, and I won't reiterate here, but I'll give 30 seconds or so for people to have a look at that. And that just lays out the different sort of medtech and pharmaceutical market sizes and the respective growth rates. You see that in Singapore, and Malaysia a little bit slower, but some strong growth there, and some very strong, large market sizes. Even something like Philippines, for example, $4 billion in their pharma, sector, which was surprising for us when we looked at the stats. But so don't ignore any of the markets in ASEAN. They're all potential opportunities. Each, though, do require its own strategy. And while an ASEAN member, it's easy to get into other ASEAN members, they do require, they have different language, different culture, different practices, often different regulatory regimes as well. So, as I said, it's a key part of what we do is to help many of you as Queensland life science companies and other Australian life science companies look at, engage better, and ideally succeed in the markets in Asia, in China and Hong Kong, in ASEAN and Singapore. We've helped around 200 organisations better understand the market through our bootcamp program, so one-day bootcamp programs. And an example. You might not be able to read that too well, but we cover off areas in that bootcamp, such as today in terms of market opportunities, but also the key challenges. So in other words, intellectual property, which always comes up specifically for China, but also other Asian countries, regulatory requirements, management of partners, supply chains, how to find investment, and we get our investment partners. So we have another key partner for our new program is the TUS network. They're about a $50 billion healthcare and innovation network around Asia. And so we're very excited that they're our key funding partner for our new program. So they'll be speaking in future programs around the investment side. And how to actually succeed in the market. So what are the war stories? What are the pitfalls to avoid? What are the things that you can do now for Queensland that will help you get into that market? Because we're going to recover post-COVID. We really have to focus much more on export. That's why Queensland government are here in China and elsewhere in Asia. That's why LSQ are focusing and partnering with us on this export opportunities. And same with QUT. We really need to be focused more and getting much more active in Asia. So in terms of, as I said, the bootcamps is the first level of support we provide. We provide one-on-one mentoring, and we've helped around 3 dozen or more organisations be mentored through our mentors in Australia, but also in Asia as well. So to help them understand the market better and have a specific strategy for their own organisation, and focused again around the early stage, as Catalyst does. Life Science Queensland's Catalyst program does, focusing around the opportunities that are available for early stage companies, not just for larger ones. So trying again get that fit happening between what you have as technology and actually what the opportunities are, and then bringing companies, as I mentioned, into the program. And again, we have this the first one-week program, as I mentioned, we'll be doing in Hong Kong with ASTP, and also in Singapore. We'll be running these one-week programs early next year, or from early next year. We also run up to 3 months into residency programs. So again, HKSTP are keen for companies to come in, to join up, to belong to their park, and they have many thousands of organisations working in healthcare and other technologies in their campus. And similarly, partners in Singapore and elsewhere are also very, very keen for companies to come through on that. And it's really only by coming into the market and spending a significant amount of time there, whether a week or a month, that you actually get to understand and appreciate the opportunities and also the strategies that come with challenges, as we mentioned. So to really get that intense experience, you really need to be here. So you want to be in Asia, you have to be in Asia, as I always say. So I guess there's a few sort of key takeaways. There's you really need, as I said, to have a key strategy, a country-specific strategy around whichever Asia market you go into. You can't just have an Asia strategy, which includes, all of Asia. China is a very, very different market. Even Hong Kong is quite a different market to China, even though it's part of the one country. And certainly the ASEAN markets are all different, even though they do belong to the same block. Going into Indonesia is quite a different ask than getting into Singapore, as you can appreciate. So understanding those market conditions, understanding the regulatory environment, the commercial environment, what opportunities, what incentives there might be, from a government perspective in that country. Obviously working with finding the partners in that area, good partners who will work with you, who will support you and help you be successful is very, very key. And it's often said that you won't be guaranteed success by finding a good partner, but you'll certainly be guaranteed failure by finding a bad one. So focus very, very much in terms of your partnering strategy as a key market. And that may be purely a license model, it may be a distributor model, it may be setting up as an entity in this market, getting investment from local investors. And of course, I haven't touched too much on the investment side, but it's something that we do and we work with a lot of companies on. We have been successful in getting investments for companies coming through the ACTI program, and also more broadly through the ones we've helped over the last 10 years as China BlueSky partners. So there are many investors who are very keen in Asia to invest in your business, but they need to know that there's an Asia strategy, an Asia story that they can invest into. They don't expect them necessarily to come to Australia, to come to Queensland to invest and write a check. They won't do that. They need to see that you're meeting them at least halfway by being determined, by being consistent, by being proactive in the market, actually understanding that market, understanding the requirements, and shaping your technology, being flexible to develop technology that's actually suitable for your for that market in question, and not just doing a one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't normally work too well. So I understand that market's very, very key. I understand obviously the competition and the partners, and I said being flexible. They're, I guess, maybe the key takeaways that from today. And basically that's probably the main part of my presentation, because I wasn't too much detail too quickly, but I'm happy to cover over that now. We've got about 25 minutes, I think, in terms of Q&A. So I finished a little bit early. But hopefully we can start the questions and answers, and I'll hand back over to Sarita to moderate that.
Thanks, Rob. Very informative overview, and I particularly liked some of the graphics in your PowerPoint, but it's certainly good to understand the demographics of these markets, and I think that really highlights the volume of opportunity. We do have a few questions that have come through, so we might just kick off with those straight away to you, Rob. The first one that came through, and I think as you were speaking about the healthcare system in China, someone has asked, Frank Stadler has asked if you're able to say a few words about wound care, the wound care market in China, if you have any knowledge around that.
Some, yes. I mean, that's very specific. I guess wound care, it's one where obviously, and it depends on the treatment. You know, if we're looking at a topical treatment, we've seen and we've been involved through a couple of organisations who've done quite well in actually working on topical treatments for wound care. Obviously, like any strategy, you know, you need to know what the opportunities are, where your potential points of entry are. So in wound care, for example, where you'd be looking at most likely, or at the first point, probably private hospitals, possibly also public hospitals. And then to understand, just to elaborate slightly, there's a number of different tiers of hospital system in China, from the very, very modern ones, about 1,500 what we call tier 1 hospitals, which are very, very similar to you'd find in Australia and in our larger cities, all the way down to the third level, which is the more smaller community-based ones. In addition to the public hospital system, you've also got an equal number now of private hospitals. So around 20,000 private hospitals in China. And again, many of those are fairly modern in their approach, although a lot smaller than the public hospital system. So in terms of wound care, you would have to look at which of those particular heads of departments would be interested in terms of maybe doing a trial. What are the opportunities within one or more of those hospitals to get into the wards there to start doing some of those trials for their technology. And then obviously in terms of looking at what is your distribution strategy, or what is your partnership model? Are you going to be selling this through pharmacies? Are you going to be selling it, if it's a topical treatment? Is it a more of an in-depth hospital-based treatment, in which case obviously you need to have a partner which is very strong in a particular hospital tier, and also particularly geographic spread as well. So I guess it's a bit general, but I'm happy to answer anything more specific. I guess on a one-on-one basis, it's not always the time in terms of webinar to cover off specific answers, but happy to do that on a one-on-one basis. Frank, if you want to contact me.
Thanks, Rob. We have a question from Ian, which is regional HQ in Hong Kong still a clearly positive way to go, or do present circumstances dictate a wait and see attitude? And Elaine has then added, similar to Ian's question, are there issues we need to consider while Australia is speaking not so nicely, in quotation marks, with China? Does this alter the view of companies in China? So I guess they're in terms of how moving forward in Hong Kong and China.
Yeah, well, I might answer the
First one.
second question from Alana. Certainly the ongoing trade issues are not helpful in terms of encouraging greater participation, I guess, from Chinese investment partners in Australia or with Australian technologies and organisations. Having said that, and actually I attended a briefing, a breakfast from AusCham, Australia Chamber of Commerce here in Shanghai just yesterday morning from the Consul General, and he had some good tips in terms of, I guess, answers to that question. And really it's about this dealing with the problem, I suppose. And there are differences of opinion. There are I guess fractious arguments happening on both sides, and it's really trying to get through that. And I guess echoing his point, it's actually quite important that we lay everything out and just try to work our way through these issues. I think Australia-China's relationship is a strong one. There's a strong need, as I mentioned, several times in the presentation, for the kind of health technologies and outcomes that Queensland businesses, Australian businesses have developed, are developing, and want to bring into the market here. So I don't think that that's going to diminish at all anytime soon. It's important that the companies don't get put off by what they see in the media. We aren't experiencing any negativity per se. It's not helpful, but by the same token, it hasn't resulted in any reduction of demand or interest in Western technologies. I think maybe you might see less investment from China indirectly into Australia, but that won't stop Chinese partners wanting to take new technologies from anywhere, particularly from Australia and Queensland, into the market here. And same with Hong Kong. Obviously, Hong Kong has the added, additional security issues coming through now, and it's put a question mark over potentially in some people's minds about whether Hong Kong is as stable as they are. And as I said, I think we have representatives from Hong Kong Science and Technology Park on our call today, and I'm sure they would reiterate that again, Hong Kong is open for business. There is, while there are challenges, these are ones which can work through and do not ultimately affect the production line, I suppose, for want of a better term, of taking technology or working with technology companies, bringing businesses into the Hong Kong region, and then helping those businesses expand to other regions, whether it's into mainland China or whether it's into other countries. I would sort of I guess in fairness to our Singapore partners, also sort of say that there are good opportunities in Singapore for those who are looking at ASEAN. And it's really that macro level that organisations and founders here need to think about boards. Where is the technology, where is the companies' Asia strategy going to be focused on? It's very hard, and I haven't seen it happen too often myself in the last 15, 20 years, of companies tackling several countries at the same time and being successful in all those countries. It can be done, but it's difficult, particularly for earlier stage organisations with smaller teams who are themselves trying to build the business up in Australia, not to mention US and Europe. So I would say to not just to put all your eggs in one basket and looking at a strategy in either Hong Kong or more greatly in China, or ASEAN, but to to make a choice, I guess, to some extent as to which one you want to prioritise first, and to get that operation established, set up, partnered, hopefully, and working, ticking away, and then look at the other market. So in terms of Hong Kong, I don't think there's any issues in Hong Kong as for Westerners coming in, Western technologies coming into the market. In fact, there's more incentives of anything now than before. I think Hong Kong government is very, very keen to get companies in, but just to make sure that location is going to service the broader aims of the Asia market. And again, if you're looking at Japan or Korea, you might want to have a separate institution, organisation, or structure in those countries. Maybe it's a primary market. It all depends in terms of what your technology is and where you think your best opportunities are.
Awesome, thank you. Darren's asked a question, if you're able to provide advice/support for the Australia-China Science and Research Fund Joint Research Centre, particularly around finding Chinese partners who will be interested in a medtech research project.
Certainly, actually, I saw something come through on the wire a couple of weeks ago about that. We have worked with helping universities. So obviously, working very closely with QUT as part of our Life Science Hub project, which is funded by the federal government. We've worked with many other universities as well around Australia, working in terms of also collaborative research. And something that we've done separately as part of our Australia-China Invest Partnering Conference that we ran here for the last 3 years with BioTech, was actually bringing in early stage research projects out of different universities and helping connect up some of those with universities here in China. And similarly, we find there's some fantastic research in regional Australia, regional Queensland, and other parts of Australia from the universities, which we're keen to partner with. And again, on the partnering side, TUS, which is obviously our key partner for our Life Science Hub project, are very interested in terms of looking at those university technologies, and they have themselves extensive networks. So we rely upon partners like that, as well as our own networks, to sort of help bring in, or match up those technologies in terms of finding partners, and be delighted to sort of talk further about how we can help on this side.
Excellent. And we'll have your details available again at the end of the webinar. So how viable, I've got another question from Jordan, how viable is medical tourism in these countries, specifically ageing patients travelling to Australia?
Well, at the moment, it's not, obviously. Yeah, there's been an increased amount. Medical tourism is quite a strong, I think it's been quite a strong grower over the last 10 years or so. You've seen a lot of tourists. I mean, up until this year, we have 1 million tourists coming in from China. I think of that, from memory, 100,000 or so were medical tourists. I could be wrong in that figure, but it's somewhere between 100 and 150,000, I think, per year were medically, and that included wellness as well. So I think as an inbound destination, Australia is very strong. Again, obviously the current trade issues don't help, and then maybe that's impacted more. But the biggest impact, of course, is COVID. Until that happens, it's very difficult to obviously develop a tourist or education based issues. And of course, as ACTI, we're dealing with it ourselves in terms of not being able to get proximate, hence today's webinar, to the market, to the companies, to you guys that we want to be talking with one-on-one. But we and I think maybe through what I have seen as successful in some of these organisations, though, is increased web-based technologies, e-health ways to sort of provide access to medicos in Australia and in other countries for Chinese patients, other Asian patients, and that's not just a short-term workaround, but probably an ongoing facet of that kind of medical tourism business, I think, which will continue beyond COVID.
Thank you. So I'm sure that you're asked quite a lot in these particular markets about IP, and we do have a comment from someone around seeing IP as a major issue with some of the Asian markets. And what are your views on a good strategy and any examples that you have seen be a success?
Okay, well, we've actually, and this is a key part, as I mentioned, in our bootcamp program, Sarita, and ongoing throughout all our programs at ACTI, that we focus a lot on IP. We've been very fortunate to have FB Rice provide very, very useful sessions to us, for us on our bootcamps around Australia over the last 2 years. And we'll be doing that as part of our Life Science Hub as well going forward. We understand that while obviously Hong Kong and Singapore and maybe some other ASEAN markets are slightly more transparent than or seen as more structured economies in terms of all treatment of IP than say China, there's still a very, very critical need to get the strategy right and get the focus right. And I guess China specifically, while a lot of organisations still regard this as a major issue, if you look at the polls done through Auscham, AmCham, FCham, it slipped down massively from the companies which are actually here and understand very well, as we do, the improvements that's been done in the market over the last decade. So with the advent of specific IP courts, which have been set up, with a better treatment of not just international IP, but this has all come from locally driven intellectual property from larger organisations, Chinese organisations who want to protect their own IP. There's been a great improvement in the way IP is treated and prosecuted in terms of infringements in the market here. But Hong Kong, Singapore always had very, very high levels of IP, protection, and we've seen a lot of cases. There have been, I guess one good example was, it's one of our co-founders of ACTI, Brendan Mason, who used to run Cochlear here in the market. Saw when he was running Cochlear on TV, one of their distributors, sort of, on TV, actually sort of opening up a Cochlear sort of implant and actually sort of claiming it was theirs and speaking about how wonderful their technology was. And of course, they quickly sort of, litigated on that and were successful and actually shut that operation down. And that's been, there are many, many, many successes of that in China in terms of Western companies being successful in closing down or getting redress for IP infringements. I must say, though, that there's been very few that have actually come across my book in terms of actual case in life sciences. There's compared to many other areas. So if you're a business relying upon design, or in terms of you're selling branded T-shirts, for example, in China, that's still probably an issue to some extent, and has been in the past. You'll get a lot more infringements around copyright and branding, logos. It's very, very important to make sure you actually, again, get your trademarks, not just your patents, sorted out for China and other countries in Asia, than you will around the actual patented technology. So we've seen very, very, very few, to be honest, in terms of cases, but those that we have seen almost inevitably end up, with a good outcome. Certainly in the last, 5 years or so.
Great, that's a great oversight. Overview, sorry, not an oversight. I'm sure you don't have oversights, Rob. So we have a question here. Can you provide any insight into the acceptance and opportunities for medical cannabis formulations, CBD, THC, and combinations of both in Asia? And MC would be very helpful to treat a range of indications that you had mentioned in your previous slides in regards to health concerns in those regions. That's the interesting one. Not one we've actually looked at a lot in terms of medical cannabis. I know for a fact at the moment that medical cannabis is still not, as far as I'm aware anyway, not legally applied, certainly not in widespread use in either China or Hong Kong. I'm not sure about Singapore and ASEAN countries, but I know from the China-Hong Kong perspective, it's not something which is readily available. I think the same for many ASEAN countries as well. So there are issues around that in terms of its perceived, links to the broader marijuana market and the perception, about legal drugs, which is correct, but there's still that negative perception around it, which makes being difficult to actually get that approval. So that one I'm happy to answer sort of offline, and maybe we can try to find a bit more research about that, but not one that we've actually looked at in any great way at this stage. Okay, thank you. Maybe a bit of education needs to happen there first. Okay, so we've still got some questions coming through. Has the model of an experienced Australian operator with expertise and track record, partnering with a local Asian enterprise to give local knowledge, proved successful? Or are there difficulties with that? Or is it horses for courses with different successful models?
Well, yeah, I think, the latter is probably the best strategy. It's picking your course, as I said, picking your market, picking a strategy, picking a partner. And that's all based around where is the unmet need that your technology is going to help meet. Essentially, not, regardless of how successful you are in Australia or even in Western economies, does not mean that you'll be successful necessarily in any economy in Asia, particularly in the more challenging markets like China, but also in potentially in Japan or other parts of the ASEAN member nations. So while you do need, obviously, capital, you do need, a track record, very, very helpful. If you've got regulatory approval in, as TJ, FDA, or CMARC, that can normally get you into most, or many of the ASEAN countries, also into Hong Kong as well. Not into China, but for those that, a number of nations that actually had that regulatory use I guess CMARC or FDA or TGA as a de facto regulatory approval, then that's very, very helpful. So getting a product which is out there, which is already developed, which is already approved and ideally selling, fantastic, but you still need to look very, very closely at what the market is and the model that you'll take into a different market. And again, this is all, it varies even within Asia, but Asia is very, very different from Europe, different from US and Australia. So that sort of answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you. We might just, with a little bit of time, we might see if we can get through one or two quick questions. So firstly, are there any job opportunities for individuals in those markets that you're across? And how have your programs been overcoming restrictions on leaving Australia, which potentially the fact that you're coming live from Shanghai might not mean you're able to do that at the moment?
Well, that's right. Well, for me personally, I can leave China, but I can't come back at the moment until the restrictions. There's obviously a blanket ban on all foreign travellers, unless those who have had specific exception. A few people I know who have managed to achieve that. So obviously, as I was just saying, in terms of you look at other markets and you adapt. And I think the key really takeaway out of all of this probably is to be flexible, to be adaptive, to look at your technology, look at your business and find ways to do it. So as ACTI, this is actually our first webinar. While we've actually done linkages in the past to our partners in China, and we'll continue to do that with TUS in our other Asia, programs we'll be running with LSQ and QT from later this year. We haven't actually run a webinar before, so this is the first one. Hopefully it's gone all right. But the key part of that, I guess, is really, again, looking at the opportunity and finding a solution for that, rather than trying to make the opportunity fit the solution that you developed. In terms of employment opportunities, which I think was the first part of your question.
Yes, individual employment opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, there is, I must say that well, there are very many, obviously, in markets like Hong Kong, in Singapore, lesser extent probably in other ASEAN countries. Language is probably the biggest issue. And similar with China, although with China, interestingly, the pharma market, certainly the pharma market, if not the medtech market here, it's been largely, I guess, language isn't as critical because it's been, many companies have been derived from founders who've come out of big pharma or spent scientists and executives who spent a lot of time in countries like Australia, but also UK and US and Europe. So it's a little bit of a bubble in a sense, a very large one, in a sense. But in terms of employment, it really depends in terms of what type of role. Again, you need, same way as looking at technology, you need to look what the opportunities are. There are, if you're an experienced farmer exec, I think there are opportunities all the way through Asia, for you if you're interested in this market. It's a very exciting place. I've been, fascinated, living here in China for the last 11 years, and it's been great being part of all of this during this time of movement, and obviously we're now expanding that into our Pan-Asia strategy. But yeah, some good times.
Excellent. We do have a couple of other questions, but we're probably starting to run out of time now, very close to 1 o'clock. There was a question around Singapore stacking up. How does Singapore stack up against Hong Kong, Korea or China? Maybe one advantage and one disadvantage, if you could do that in 30 seconds. Singapore versus the others.
Singapore, Hong Kong, China. Okay. Singapore obviously is one key advantage is it's English is the official language. It's also a very dynamic exchange and a lot of government incentives. A lot of government incentives in Singapore, probably perhaps more than other markets. Similar to Hong Kong, I guess as well. Again, English is fairly widely spoken, not as much. But and the exchange there in Hong Kong actually is only the same as ASX and TSX, and Canada actually allows pre-revenue companies from last year to actually list. So it's very, very similar to the ASX model, whereas as a biotech company, a medtech company which is not getting revenue, you can actually list on the Hong Kong exchange. Very, very important. And HK are great. And China, of course, as the biggest market in Asia, second biggest, as I said, in the world. Everything is here, which is why it's very hard for us to disengage, from this. We're connected in so many different ways. But the opportunity, the growth, and the size of the market, it really sort of can't be ignored.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and answering those questions. And thanks everybody for your participation on the Q&A function of the webinar today. We might just wrap up with a few contact details, which I understand my friend Lockie is going to pop up for us any moment. So obviously, Rob, through the ACTI program and BlueSky partners, is a great contact to have, which we found really valuable. So those are Rob's email there, and also Nagaraj through Life Sciences Queensland. Again, Department of State Development has regional economic development offices across Queensland. So if you just pop onto the website, you'll be able to see the details for each of the regional offices across Queensland. And also with Trade Investment Queensland, again, we have regional advisors across the region, and they can actually work with you to help you to identify what markets you may need to look at. And our department, obviously, our regional economic development officers will work closely with our regional advisors from TIQ, and they can put you in contact and find that information through the commissioners of those particular markets. So again, I'd really like to thank Rob for his time, and the technology did us well today, Rob, so that was great. And Life Sciences Queensland, of course, thank you, Nagaraj. And they are also obviously a great network for businesses across Queensland who are wanting to ascertain what market they should potentially be looking at for export. And Nadine, who is the marketing manager from LSQ, and Lockie, who's the stakeholder engagement manager, have been instrumental and very helpful in pulling this together for us. I'd also like to thank our Trade Investment Queensland colleagues who have hosted Rob today and also worked quite closely with him, obviously, in his work over there. So that basically wraps us up for today. As I said, thank you for your participation. Please, everybody, stay well and have a restful weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita.